that's impacting the entire planet, and that's climate change. But there are two elected officials that are stepping up and doing the right thing by addressing the danger of climate change. That is Senator Berine Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. They are making a move to declare the climate crisis an official emergency. A group of lawmakers, including the 2020 Democratic presidential contender Bernie Sanders, are proposing to declare a climate crisis an official emergency, a significant recognition of the threat taken after considerable pressure from environmental groups. Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez from New York, Errol Blumenauer, as well as a Democratic congressman from Oregon, plan to introduce the same resolution in the House on Tuesday. Their offices have confirmed. Climate activists have been calling for a declaration as data shows nations are not on track to limit the dangerous heating of the planet significantly enough. The UN has warned the world is experiencing one climate disaster every week. A new analysis from the economic firm Rodam Group today finds that the U.S. Achieved less than half of the percentage of pollution reductions it promised other countries in an international agreement. 16 countries and hundreds of local governments, including New York City last month, has declared a climate emergency already, according to the advocacy group, the Climate Mobilization. The activist group Extinction Rebellion has said the declaration is the first crucial step in addressing this crisis. Right now, the resolution states the global warming caused by human activities, which increase emissions of greenhouse gases, has resulted in a climate emergency, and that severely and urgently impacts the economic and social well-being, health and safety, and national security of the United States. In fact, speaking of the national security, there have been many military leaders, generals, admirals, people in the high echelon of the Pentagon have stated that climate change will be a serious threat to our nation's security, as there are some parts of this country where we haven't updated our infrastructure, and the problem is that as soon as a climate disaster happens, that infrastructure is falling apart, and you have people without maybe food or water or electricity for months.
But where will we get the money to pay for that, Kit? I mean, come on, is that really important? I mean, is infrastructure really important? I mean, where are we going to get the money?
Well, we are able to have money for a Joint Strike Fighter that doesn't fly at night. We have money for that same Joint Strike Fighter that impacts the health and well-being of said pilots. Mm-hmm. We have money for a $200 million drone that flew into Iranian airspace.
I was going to say for bait to get us into more war.
Yeah, to get into wars, but then it was shot down probably by a cheaper missile or a cheaper drone by the Iranian military, if that's how the United States government wants to portray that incident. What happened. We have money for more investment into the military-industrial complex. So I think it's fair enough to say that we do have money to invest into climate change and actually come up with policies and create a system in which we can challenge climate change and, more importantly, reverse its effects. It's just the military-industrial complex has its foot in the front door, and thus they're able to dictate all these terms. But it's interesting enough that we also have a presidential administration that refuses to acknowledge the threat of climate change.
Well, and it's wild that it's actually a bold step to go out in public and express factual items and then say, oh, based on these facts, we're seeing that this is an emergency. Like, that's a bold move somehow, and we're looking at, these progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders and like Tulsi Gabbard, and we're like, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and we're like, wow, they're so bold. There's really nothing necessarily bold about what they're doing, other than, standing in the face of a bunch of people who deny that this is an emergency at all.
Well, so when you mention Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and Tulsi Gabbard, who wrote the OFF Act, it's very important for us to realize that in this country, it is technically, at least from my point of view, it is a bold step, because Let's rewind back the clocks even before we even started doing this here at Heartlands Media, where let's say we're watching CNN or MSNBC, and of course CNN would do the most famous thing. They would have a climate scientist and then a climate change denier, give the scientist some time to speak, then the denier some time to speak, and then what does the moderator do? Well, we'll let you guys decide. Even though 99% of the world's scientists are in agreement, I think even 100% of scientists are in agreement that climate change is a reality.
I think the American people are in the 70-something percentile of agreement around that. So,
right,
Again, that's what I'm pointing to. I think it's really a sick thing when something that is so clearly an emergency is a bold step in declaring that emergency, you know. Right. And I think I'm just pointing to the weakness of the Democratic Party and how annoyed I am with them right now. Particularly around this topic, but around so many topics, especially recently. We reported, I think last week, on Nancy Pelosi's refusal to do anything about Trump and his administration. And I really look forward to the day when this isn't bold, then this is like, oh, no, duh. Of course, this is what's going on. And this is, of course, the steps we need to take. And of course, we have money to build our infrastructure. And of course, we have the technology to actually roll back some of the situations that we've made for ourselves in the world of natural gas and coal. And, you know, of course, we have the ability to create jobs out of, you know, the Green New Deal and generate more economy and income for people. It's just silly, and it's so obvious, and this is just me being frustrated and I'm going on a rant. Sorry.
Well, no, I think it's important for us to go on a rant because the rest of the international community is looking at the United States for leadership, yet we have an administration that refuses to acknowledge climate change. And you mentioned the Democrats and the Republicans. First you mentioned the Democrats because the Democrats take money from the same fossil fuel lobby people who are in Washington, D.C. Same as the Republicans. We've said this before on the show. The Democratic and Republican establishment are friends with each other. They take money from the fossil fuel industry. They take money from Wall Street, the big banks and large corporations, and also in turn take money from the military-industrial complex. And what do all these organizations and groups have in common is that they also have ties with the fossil fuel industry, and they are addicted to oil, which is allowing this country to still be addicted to oil, even though the rest of the whole world is still moving on away from fossil fuels and investing into green energy and green technologies. We need to do that, and in fact, what green technologies can do is bring in more jobs.
And the addiction to oil, what that will do is bring in more war.
Oh, not only more war, but more importantly, it will keep the ridiculous influence of the military-industrial complex over Washington, D.C. And
then, of course, you know, as we know, the ramifications of actual climate change, where people will be ousted from their homes, people will be killed. And then we'll have a whole other war of sorts on our hands.
And we can't afford it, so at least Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez are stepping up their game and addressing the
and calling a spade a spade, calling it what it is. It's a national emergency. It's an international emergency.
And if we don't do it now, our species is doomed.